Kobe, starting with you on this one. What should we expect from Yuki Tsunoda as he gets up to speed with Red Bull? And will the pressure of being Max Verstappen's teammate be too much for him to let this special weekend sink in?
Well, Josh, I'm going to start off with the second part of that question you just asked, and I hope Yuki Tsunoda will get an opportunity, to just to sit back and reflect on this big weekend for him, because being able to, get the promotion to being a Red Bull driver heading into your home Grand Prix, that's a big deal, and very rare. You don't really get to see that often, where a driver who's been working so hard to prove himself get to debut with the big team at his home Grand Prix. And I know Yuki, he's going to be in a car that could potentially win the race, but will Yuki win on debut? That would definitely be quite a big one, for all the script writers and all of that. If Yuki Tsunoda were to go out there and win in his Red Bull debut with the Honda engine at Suzuka in his native Japan, that would be really special. But it's definitely a wonderful moment when you really think about it. And we know the pressure coming with Red Bull. I know we'll get a little bit more into the pressure in just a little bit, but it's going to be really difficult for Yuki to try to do what, the others before him weren't able to do, which is to, really stand on their 2 feet beside Max Verstappen. So it doesn't feel like that Max Verstappen is carrying the whole team on his back while the second driver is just, flailing in the wind. And it's going to be difficult. I know Yuki's already spoken to the media this week, and he feels confident that he can tame the Red Bull, but so did the other drivers. They thought that they could get on that Red Bull and ride it, but they end up getting bucked off, and Yuki's going to have to try really hard, and maybe the Red Bull will suit him. Maybe it won't. We'll just have to wait and see there. But I certainly think that he's going to have to try to impress the Red Bull team very quickly here. You see Liam Lawson got 2 weekends to show what he could do, and they weren't impressed. They weren't willing to give him the opportunity to learn. And if Yuki comes out, performs on the same level as Lawson, or even worse, then who knows what Red Bull is going to do at that point. They might not be left with many options then. But for Yuki, I think it's a really great story that he's making his debut with Red Bull at his home race, driving a car, in his nation's colors. That's a special moment. But the job at hand, being a Red Bull driver, lots of pressure there, and I'm sure he's definitely going to be feeling it from the time he pulls out of the garage in FP1.
Yeah, it'd be a massive moment for him, in those special colours as we've seen before, for Yuki. I mean, better late than never, I guess. And we talked about it a lot on the show, the 4 of us last week too. I mean, that would be the scriptwriter's dream, as you say, Kobe, if he was to come out and miraculously win at the weekend. Would that be bigger than Max winning on his Red Bull debut at Barcelona all those years ago? Kind of think it might be just a bit more of a bigger deal. I know he's had obviously much more experience as a Grand Prix driver than Max had to that point in his career, but to be on home ground in the Japanese flag colours would be massive. But I don't think it's going to be that easy. As we've seen from the last couple of races, that car isn't perhaps as nailed on as it was for the last couple of years with Max at the helm. So going to be interesting, and I'll go back to a point I raised on this very show last week when we were talking about this very same discussion. I know we talked about it a lot last week. What happens if he gets knocked out in Q1 on Saturday? What happens then? Let's hope this time that he's had to wait for his chance. Now he's got it. Give him time. If it doesn't go quite right over these next 3 weeks, and of course we've got a triple header over the next couple of weeks of Grand Prix, Suzuka this weekend, then Bahrain and Jeddah on Easter Sunday. So quick rotation for Yuki and that team to get really up to speed. Obviously, we have to immersify himself with all the new mechanics and engineers and all that kind of thing and he's got a great chance to do it over these next couple of weeks with them all being on the road together. So that's a positive. I'm just hoping that he has a good, clean weekend, and if he can be in the mix in and around somewhere of Max's running, wherever that is in the running order on Sunday, whether it be at the front or where they were in China, sort of fourth, fifth, sixth with the Ferraris, then that would be the most positive thing to come out of the weekend, I think, for Red Bull as a whole. They will feel like, I'm sure they'll feel pretty vindicated if Tsunoda can get a top 6 finish and be somewhere in that Verstappen pace realm, let's say.
Personally, I think it was about time for Tsunoda, but the way that Liam Lawson was dropped into the Racing Bulls team after not performing well in Red Bull. I think Liam Lawson should have got given a bit more chance to prove himself. Of course, Suzuka was a trap for him that really suits him in Super Formula, so it would have been a shame. But to be honest, I personally feel like, as Dana Life said in the chat, that Honda has put quite a bit of pressure on the team, seeing them not their second drive did so well, and they're thinking, oh, Yuki made you as well. And he's 24, and it's great that he's been given an opportunity at his home circuit. He's very experienced. He got points on his F1 debut back in 2021. The thing is, I agree with Kobe and Matt. We have to give him more time, because with Liam Lawson, he had time to get used to the car in preseason testing. Tsunoda doesn't have preseason testing in the RB21, so it's going to take a bit of a while for him to familiarise with the car. He has had plenty of time in the simulator, but again, as like with real life racing, nothing can match experience of driving it for real. He seems pretty confident in terms of the feel of the car, but again, it's a simulation car, so I think it might be different. And the tricky thing is, he's got to build a relationship with Max Verstappen, and I think I could see that Yuki has nothing to lose at this point. I think we've heard on the radio and previous radio stations that, I believe, according to Albert Marco, Yuki has been given a year to prove himself. Of course, he has a bit more time because he hasn't had pre-season testing compared to it. I think if Yuki does go on to even not be last and beating Liam Lawson's results, that is a win-win situation. But I think he's been told by Christian Horner and all that, you got to get close to Max. If you're not close to Max, then are we going to start to question the car? And if Yuki Tsunoda is performing as bad as well, I think we all owe Checo an apology, because I think when the car was great, Perez was performing great. But when the car was bad from 2023, as I said in this very show last week, then we were starting to see him perform that badly. And yeah, I agree with Ben that if Yuki doesn't perform well, I think we owe Checo an apology.
I've said that from day one, really. I think Checo, Matt's shaking his head.
I disagree on that Perez point. I'm sorry. He's had however many Grand Prix previously. He went to McLaren off the back of a good run at Sauber early in his career as the Lewis replacement, was heralded as a bit of a next big thing, flopped. Midfield runner. He didn't have granted, that car was not great that year, but he was way off of Jensen, and then got the flick after 1 year. Went to Force India Racing Point, whatever they were called at the time. Did okay as a midfieldy runner. Picked up a victory at Sakir after all those years of trying. Gets bolted into the Red Bull seat. Granted, he did okay for a little while. Got a couple of wins and stuff. Azerbaijan, Miami, places like that. You can't apologise for his performance last season. It was absolutely woeful in the best of
Yeah. But I will just try and defend him a little bit by saying that he said the car was damaged and wrong as soon as he got the spec on the car, where they've traced it back to and found out it went wrong.
Spain, last year. Is it last year or 2023?
23, Spain 23. But they didn't believe him because Max kept winning and was so dominant. Yeah. So is that car just built around him? Yeah. As Ben says, and to Matt's point, no doubt it would be bigger since one, Yuki is driving an objectively worse car, and two, Max would have only finished third, and Nico and Lewis not taking each other out on lap one. Yeah. Matt, just want to say something. It's entirely possible, that it could happen. I mean, Suzuka's not really known, is it, for two McLarens crashing into each other and somebody completely unlikely taking the win in a car that's woefully underpowered. I mean,
1989.
Yeah, I mean, and then also for McLaren and a Ferrari to take each other out as well. Yeah, and for someone else to That's never happened before, has it? Yeah.
No, it hasn't.
There's a bit of a precedent setting here, isn't there? If Yuki wins, I will be the first one to jump up and down in the commentary box, which I think is actually what did my neck in a few days ago in the NASCAR race. When Mark did it, I think that's when I did it. I jumped up and down, and I think I've knocked something, so I've got a bit of a sore
Did you jump
neck.
up? Did you get annoyed with Mark Marquez's crash?
As soon as he went down, I jumped up and down in the commentary box, and I think I've landed funny on my ankle, and it shot back up because I already had a problem with the neck. And I woke up Monday morning screaming in pain because I was
Ow.
locked. It eased off a bit, but like I have to swivel around. So I'm looking a bit crooked. I agree. I believe Kobe, who mentioned how Red Bull might end up like Honda MotoGP with Mark, to follow on to the point as well.
Yeah, we talked about it last week, didn't we, I think?
It's the same situation brewing, isn't it, for that Red Bull car? And they are bringing upgrades to Japan as well as a new livery. In fact, Red Bull was the first car to arrive at Japan. It was there since Sunday night. And that's how we knew when April the 1st came around, it wasn't actually a fake livery. It was true because we got images from inside the pits of the shiny livery. And it's not a matte livery either. It is actually a glossy white livery. Adam says if Yuki wins, the entire country of Japan will go insane. I think they will, and they'll still stay behind after and clean up. They're the most respectful fans I've ever seen in motor racing. I love it. I love Japan.
There was a comment earlier that flashed up. I think it was from A Day in the Life, who said, "Is there been some Honda dealing in this deal?" You have to say, thank you, Kobe. You have to feel like that has happened and probably should have happened. After
I think so.
Last season.
I want to throw just one more quick question, if I can, into the script. I did mention this last week, but there is still increasing rumours going along, and it's come up in the last few days, is that Fernando Alonso will retire at the end of 2026, and then it will be Tsunoda alongside Verstappen for 2027, and Stroll will probably will leave at the end of this year, and Tsunoda go over. How damaging could this be? I'll start with you, Matt, for Red Bull on this, in terms of if they do lose both their drivers, just as they start to get a bit of stability back?
I mean, they've lost their guru already. He's gone to Aston Martin. They are losing / changing their engine supplier when Ford come in, although it's not really going to be a Ford. It's going to be a Red Bull powertrain with a Ford sticker on the side. And then now they're going to perhaps lose both of their drivers. The key question here is, why isn't the man at the top under pressure, Mr. C. Horner, especially after all the stuff that happened last year? Now all of this stuff's going on. He does seem to be made of Teflon. At some point, and again, if the Red Bull car next year is, not at the front with this big regulation change we've got coming, there needs to be a change at the top. And I think we talked about that a little bit on the show last week, that heads need to roll in all the driver debacle. And if these things continue, then something needs to change.
It was interesting that I was reading the news over the last few days, and Max Verstappen getting. I think I heard that Max Verstappen got annoyed that Liam Lawson was dropped this soon, because he even said that he was going to help Lawson get used to the car. He openly said that he was going to help develop Lawson. Max Verstappen's good at doing that, and he even liked to tweet or an Instagram post of him like criticising like Red Bull or something. And we do know, I think, according to rumours, Verstappen has a clause or something like that in his contract, that if Red Bull are not performing great, he could just be like, bye-bye, sayonara, see you later, and move on to a different team. But the question is, what team? Maybe Aston Martin, maybe Mercedes, probably not, because I know Toto Wolff has openly said that I think he's more than likely going to be keeping both of their drivers due to the fact that they're both performing so well in the first few races of the season, in particularly George Russell. So, yeah, I think Verstappen is not a happy camper at the moment. And if Max Verstappen is not challenging for the title, I think we could see him leaving Red Bull sooner than 2026, maybe even the end of 2025.
Yeah, and as Ben has put in the chat below, it was Gita Vandergarde's post that he ended up liking. And then I think it was Helmut Marko who went on the record, I think with motorsport.com, and said that Max was not happy at all by the decision making or lack thereof that Red Bull have been making. But yeah, it would be really interesting if Max Verstappen and Yuki Tsunoda, stayed with Honda and went with the Aston Martin F1 team in the next few years. And we've talked about Lance Stroll and how he could just go off and race the Aston Martin Valkyrie hypercar program with the harder racing. Yeah, that would be really good for him since Lance has a passion for sports car racing. He's done the Rolex 24 in the past, and I'm sure he'd love to do some more sports car racing. So that would definitely satisfy him. And Fernando Alonso would not be surprised at all to see him retire from Formula One once and for all this time, instead of retire then come back a few years later. But yeah, as Joe has also mentioned, Ford entering Red Bull at the wrong time it's an interesting dilemma to have, given like Yuki Tsunoda, like you've worked so hard your career to drive with that top team like Red Bull, and then all of a sudden Honda's going the other direction, and then you have Red Bull, and like who do you follow? Do you stay with Red Bull, or do you continue to your relationship with Honda and move over to Aston Martin? So Yuki Tsunoda is gonna have to make a decision, in the next several months or so. And for Max Verstappen, if he decides to leave, that would be a massive, massive blow to Red Bull. And if Verstappen leaves and Tsunoda, like, what are Red Bull going to do with their driver lineup heading into the future? Like, who knows where they could potentially turn, because that car right now, it seems like Max Verstappen's the only one who can drive it. And if they had like two other drivers in that car, they're like, we make you wonder, would Red Bull, even be battling for points? Or would they consistently finish outside of the points? It's just, an intriguing dilemma that needs to be studied.
And that's a great segue. Oh, go on, Matt, first of all.
I was just going to say, it's similar to, if you think back to the early 90s, when McLaren and Honda went their separate ways, and it took McLaren a long time to get back to when they had the Mercedes and the silver cars when Hakkinen won the championship, because they went through Ford in '93, which was a good car but a terrible engine. Then they had a couple of years with Peugeot, just didn't work at all. And then a couple of years, learning years with Mercedes before it came good. So they were up here, and then there was a big dip before they came back to the top. Could happen with Red Bull.
Yeah, they really regretted not signing with Renault, didn't they? Like Williams, McLaren had that option for 93 and it went straight away, and they went the complete opposite. They should have taken Renault. Ben says Bernie Collins went a bit too far when she said that Red Bull Racing had the 10th fastest, i.e. worst car right now, but her point is valid. There'll be a midfield team at best right now if Max walks. I think Bernie's right. And I hate to say it, but if you look at it, if Max wasn't there for a race, they would be at the back of the grid, because that car is a dog. It really is.
It's Marc Marquez Honda MotoGP 2020 all over again.
Yeah, exactly. And if you can't now not lie. We've had two races, and in both those races, Liam Lawson, as you said, he's been out in Q1, and he's also had to start from the pit lane. Liam Lawson in a main Red Bull has never started on the starting grid. Australia, pit lane. China, pit lane. It makes no sense. And time again, you look at the long run pace, and it's just not there. You look at the qualifying pace, it's not there. Sauber are faster in the long run pace. We saw that with Hulkenberg's drive. Aston Martin are faster. Williams aren't now the 5th fastest team as we were expecting. They're the 4th fastest team. In many respects as well. Yes, I know Ferrari got disqualified, but they're faster than Ferrari. And they've got a better strategy than Ferrari. If Sainz gets his game together, they'll be battling for points. And that's going to hurt Yuki and whoever else ends up in that second Red Bull seat at the end of the year as we go out. Rain is forecast as a day in the life. Is it really?
I'm not surprised. Japan always likes to throw a spanner in the works with rain, and Japan's always a safety car specialist as well when it's raining.
I dropped my pen. Jess, you and me were in the planning meeting earlier on where JT was showing us that graphic with the new LED systems we're adding this weekend.
Yeah.
Something tells me that's a good idea if it starts to rain, because it tells
we're going to use that quite a lot, aren't we?
Yeah, well, I'll get that on and for a link for people in the chat as well, because it's a free thing you can do. But brilliant to segue back to Kobe's point earlier on. With Tsunoda preparing to begin his stint with Red Bull, it was F1.com's Lawrence Barretto actually caught up with the driver who got dropped by Red Bull at the end of the 2024 season, Sergio Pérez. He was left without a seat on the 2025 F1 grid, but he's still paying attention to everything happening at the pinnacle of motorsport. Now, when he was asked about the driver swap between Tsunoda and Lawson, Perez said he spent so long at Red Bull that everyone forgot how difficult the car is to drive. And he praised Tsunoda, saying that he has the talent, the speed, and the mentality to cope with the demands of pressure of being a Red Bull F1 driver. Now, last week, Matt did kind of mention this, but we didn't dive too deeply into it. But if Tsunoda proves not to be much of an upgrade over Lawson, then Red Bull will be in a very difficult position. On a separate note, Perez confirmed that he's been approached by multiple teams about a potential return to the F1 grid in 2026. He said that there are some interesting projects out there and will only come back if projects makes sense and something he may genuinely actually enjoy. Now, given how poorly his Red Bull tenure ended, Checo might have some unfinished business to settle in Formula 1. The link to that article is in the video description as well. But Jess, starting with you on this one, despite Perez showing the confidence he has in Tsunoda to beat the odds at Red Bull, seriously, are Red Bull really out of options if Tsunoda can't execute his role with the team? And also, should Perez really return to Formula 1 in 2026 or ride off into the sunset?
I think Red Bull have been out of options since, I think, the second driver situation has gone completely crazy. Obviously, we talked about it last week, like Alex Albon not performing well against Max Verstappen, Pierre Gasly, Daniel Kvyat, or even go as far as when David Coulthard outperforming one of the other drivers and them not doing well. There's not many options. Yes, you've got Isaac Hadjar, but again, he's new to the sport. Is he going to do well and stuff like that? And I do know that if Tsunoda and any of the Red Bull camp not going to do well, I think they've only got one driver. And again, we haven't seen what he's capable of in the F1 side of things because he hasn't got a super license yet. And there are talks that they're wanting to give an exception like Mercedes did with Antonelli. That's Arvid Lindblad. He is a talented driver in the world of the feeder series. But again, it's too early to judge on it. He's going to do well. I think that's the only option. But of course, you got Sainz, you got Albon. I don't think they'll be rolling out Albon. Russell maybe, but I doubt he would want to go to Red Bull. He would rather stay at Mercedes where they actually do well with their junior program. So I think the only option they've got is Lindblad, and if he doesn't do well, then Red Bull will run out of options. And in terms of Perez and going into Formula 1 in 2026, I'm starting to think that they should have at least one driver that is experienced, that can bring the team to good heights, that has had experience of doing well in championships. I don't think Perez would be a good fit for that. I think one driver that would potentially be Valtteri Bottas. I mean, he's the third driver in the Mercedes camp. He's been so close to winning titles against Lewis Hamilton. He could bring so much experience. And then I think there should be a new driver, a rookie that could join them. It's Colton Herta has been linked with a move to Cadillac. No offense, if a Cadillac team does not have an American driver as a rookie, then that would be weird. I think, no offense, despite what Ben, I think, was saying earlier in the chat about his brilliant performances in 2021, 22, 23, I think Perez's time is done in Formula 1, and I think a rookie should be given a chance to show what they're made of in the Cadillac team in 2026, alongside an experienced driver that's won Constructors' Championships, has won races and stuff like that. And I think just Perez might have had this day. But you never know. If Perez gets into Cadillac in 2026, go get him. I can't wait to see what he could do. But in my opinion, Bottas just has a bit more drive to bring the team forward.
Yeah, I mean, Lindblad, you mentioned, Jess, he's probably the next one up in the ladder, but he's very early in his F2 career, one weekend at Melbourne. We'll have to wait and see what he can do. One thing we didn't mention when we were talking about China last week was they showed a lot of Ayumu Iwata sat on the pit wall during the coverage, I thought.
Oh, yeah.
He's the reserve for both. I guess he's the reserve for both, but he was in Racing Bulls.
RB. It was Racing Bulls, yeah.
Over the weekend. Think back to previous Red Bull pickups, apart from obviously David Coulthard at the very beginning of Red Bull, the only people they've really gone into the to use a soccer term, transfer window for that wasn't already in the system, Mark Webber and Sergio Perez. Everyone else that has come through either of the Red Bull teams, maybe they went and got Max, I suppose, to get him away from Mercedes early on, and they poached Vettel from BMW. You take those two out, and of course they've been supreme. That's 4 out of all of the Red Bull drivers, and we named them pretty much everybody, didn't we, on the show last week when we were doing the list. They don't go outside of, they don't get out of their own lane, if that makes sense, to go and get someone. So I don't see that happening. Perez, I guess that is probably his next best option if he wants to come back, and he's got a couple of more years left in him, is to go to Cadillac, perhaps with Colton as his teammate. Maybe there was all that talk about Bottas. I think he probably is. I don't think that's going to be an option. We'll have to wait and see. Been running around in a McLaren this week as Valtteri Bottas at Barcelona, oddly. But yeah, I think, and that's probably Perez's only way back if he can get in with Cadillac in the coming year or so. But even that, to me, is a slim deal.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what Red Bull is gonna do if Yuki Tsunoda, ends up flopping like his predecessors have in that second seat. It's just gonna be a really difficult situation, like you were saying, Matt. If Tsunoda, ends up not performing, he heads need the role, at the very top of Red Bull, like Christian Horner, needs to be held accountable, and obviously he hasn't been held accountable, for some of the poor decisions he's made as a team principal. And obviously, I think there needs to be a new day at Red Bull altogether. I think it would be very beneficial for both sides if Helmut Marko, just left entirely from the sport and had someone else, with a brand new voice at Red Bull. I think that would be very helpful. And Christian Horner move on as well, do like a full blown rebuild, kind of like you see in your traditional, sports teams. It'd be like, things are not going well. It's either going bad or, we're just getting tired of hearing the same voice. So we're just going to blow everything up and start all over. I think that might be the best case scenario for Red Bull, especially in the case of losing both Verstappen and Tsunoda, because the outlook right now for Red Bull doesn't really seem to be positive outside of Verstappen. But who knows, maybe when Yuki Tsunoda come in, they and Red Bull continue to work on this year's car, maybe the dynamic can improve, because we know in sports things can change pretty quickly. And in regards to Sergio Perez, I wouldn't be totally against, Cadillac bringing him in to lead the team and a young rookie driver, whether it's Colton Herta, Jack Crawford, or someone else. I'm a big fan of redemption stories in sports, and given how his tenure ended at Red Bull, I think it would be really cool to see Checo come back, as a driver with a renewed confidence, and try to go out there, and end his F1 career on his own terms instead of having it end in a really disappointing way as it did last year in Abu Dhabi. And we got Adam in the chat room right here saying that Red Bull isn't the same Red Bull from a few years ago. Yeah, that is very obvious that they're not the same Red Bull at all. And you also asked, could Max Verstappen go road racing after his contract in F1 is done? He does have a sports car team. Yeah, I think the name of his team is Verstappen.com Racing. And we actually reported on his sports car, his GT3 sports car program a few weeks ago. He's gonna be entered in an Aston Martin in GT World Challenge Europe for a few drivers there. We'll see how he gets along with that. And yeah, I would not be surprised to see Max Verstappen enter sports car racing when his Formula One career is over. He seems more excited about doing that in his post career rather than, let's say, going to Formula E, IndyCar, anything like that. I would not be surprised to see Max Verstappen in the GT car, or even a prototype in the World Endurance Championship, or even some of the marquee endurance events in IMSA.
Max, do you want to race 8 times a year or 24 times a year with a brand new baby?
That's well true. Before we move on, because we must quickly, to use Kobe's sports team analogy, you think of this as an NFL team. They've lost their offensive coordinator in Adrian Newey. They're not going to get rid of the quarterback in Max Verstappen. So the next person that needs to go is the head coach, and that's Christian Horner.
You're going to be on his case all the week, all season, aren't you?
I am. It's time to go, Christian. I'm sorry.
Well,
Time to go. Live off your days in your Oxfordshire mansion with your horses and ride off into the sunset. Day in the life. So the question becomes, how long in the Constructors' Championship? How low, I think he's probably been there. Do they finish in the Constructors' Championship? Well, probably fourth is the lowest they would probably finish, but we'll have to wait and see how that pans out. could be a completely different Red Bull this time next Wednesday. And I don't mean in the driver. I don't mean in the driver market after the weekend.